All righty. So with that, we are at 8 o'clock, I believe. And I want to welcome everybody to Manuscript Monday. We have an incredible presentation tonight, Spanish New Orleans and the Caribbean, presented by Dr. Alfred E. Lemmon, who is the director of the Williams Research Center of the Historic New Orleans Collection. And we're glad you're here. Looks like we got about 70 people will be joining us during the course of the evening, and maybe even more. Some people pop in that haven't even registered, which is perfectly fine. So with that, let's just get started. So who is the sponsor? The sponsor of Manuscript Monday is the Manuscript Society, an organization that's been around for many, many years with a very active board and a very active membership with all kinds of things that I'll tell you about in just a little bit. Why a webinar? Well, first off, it's the easiest way to reach people. It's the cheapest way to reach people, and it's the most wonderful way these days to share information about some amazing topics, including the one we're going to talk about tonight. Why now? Why not? We try to do them every Monday, the first Monday of the month. I'm sorry, the first Monday of the month, called Manuscript Monday. If there's a big holiday on a Monday, then it's Manuscript Monday on a Tuesday. Later on, I'll tell you a little bit about some other things that are coming up, programs we have planned, and look for your input for other ideas and things that we might do for Manuscript Monday. My name is Brian Cathanis. I'm a member of the Manuscript Society, a former trustee, and I'm delighted to be your host tonight. Who is invited? It's wide open. You don't have to be a member to join. Most of you are not. There's members from a variety of appraisal societies. We've invited folks from the Society of American Archivists. We've invited our friends and neighbors, and certainly members of the Manuscript Society. I'll tell you about what we're going to cover in just a little bit, and I'll also tell you a little about how you can get more information on this program and how to be a member of the Manuscript Society. So with that, here's what we're going to cover tonight. Dr. Lemmon's going to introduce us to the Historic New Orleans Collections exhibit devoted to the topic of this voyage, tonight's topic. This voyage will not only explore the Spanish contributions, but the unknown lives of better known personalities of the period. And I'll let him tell you a little more about that. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. You're going to get to see things that most people never get to see, unless, of course, you go to New Orleans to this exhibit. So it's going to be a good ride. We wrap up at 9 o'clock. There'll be time for questions, and I'll ask you to hold those or to type them into the question box. If you have a question, you can just type it into the chat box, which is just fine. You can raise your hand. There's a little hand thing that you can raise your hand, and I'll do my best to chat with you a little bit about that. But we're pretty much going to hold our questions to the end. So write them down or send them to me, and I'll make sure that Alfred gets a chance to answer them for you. I'm going to let you read his bio, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about him that's not on this little bio right here. We could probably fill up 20 or 30 slides with Alfred's background and his involvement. I know him through the Manuscript Society. He's an amazing human being, a wonderful friend. He is a lot of fun, and he's forgotten more about just about everything that most of us will ever know. So I present to you Dr. Alfred Lemmon. And with that, Alfred, I am going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to turn the screen over to you so that you can, come here, let's do that, so that you can do your screen. So let me do this, more, stop video, make the host. I'm making you the host, all right? And you can.
Am I free to start?
Hang on, I'm doing that right now, and you should be able to share your screen. So if you click your share screen, your green share screen button at the bottom.
It should be up there.
Okay. Try the green screen share. I don't know if I clicked the make you a host button soon enough. So let me get that out of there. Okay. Let me see if I made you the host. Nope. Host disabled screen sharing. So you should, okay, so you should now be the host on that. Let me see if I got this. Share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. I may have to go back and change one thing here. Let me get out of this. Go that down. Do you see your screen share button there?
Now I see.
Yep. Click on that.
My young assistant.
It's good.
able
It's good.
assistant,
Good to have folks who know.
Yes. I click share.
Yep. Click on that. And then there you go. So it has now come up. I can see your screen, and all you want to do at this point, just go to slideshow
Correct.
right there, and then start from the beginning.
Yes, that would
Oh,
be.
now, and you clicked those two little buttons that said share audio, video, and optimize video when you hit the screen share.
Hmm.
Remember the two little boxes at the bottom? Do you remember hitting those when you shared the screen?
No, I.
All right, that's okay. I'm gonna take it back just for a second, okay?
Okay.
And then we're gonna have you share your screen again. I'm gonna do it one more time, and then make sure this time. Oh, hold on, let's do this. Get this out of here. Good. Okay, you're up. I want to be able to have you stop sharing your screen. You have that little red box there.
Yeah.
I'm going to have you redo it again just so you can do there you go. We're going to do it one more time. I'm going to make you share your screen again. Okay. Okay, and you should be able to, let me do this now, make sure I got it. All right, and you can still do your screen share if you go to that. Hit your screen share again. And now that box will come up, and before you hit share, those two little boxes at the bottom you want to click. One that says share sound and optimize your video. That way we can hear your video when you hit the video.
Okay.
All right, you're good. Look at you go. All right,
The
ladies and
one
gentlemen,
thing
Alfred Lemmon. Look at that. You're in. It looks great. We can see your full
Oh.
screen. You're good to go.
The one thing y'all obviously know by now is that in spite of that wonderful introduction, I am not a technological wizard and do not pretend to be one. Tonight's topic is Spanish New Orleans in the Caribbean, and I do have to put some things in perspective so that the topic will be better understood. First of all, the Spanish and French monarchs had been intermarrying for a very long period of time. And basically in 1700, the last Habsburg king of Spain died. The title of King of Spain then went to France. Now, the reason for this was because Louis XIV was married to a Spanish infanta or princess. But the French had some initial problems. First person in line for the French throne had to disqualify himself as King of Spain. Second person in line, you always need a spare, had to disqualify himself as King of Spain. So finally they got to the third person in line, the Duc d'Anjou, who did not have to disqualify himself as potential King of France and was able to become the King of Spain. And throughout the years, this period of 1700 forward, roughly corresponded to the time in which Louisiana was being established. Of course, this alliance between Spain and France with the Bourbon throne, with a Bourbon member on both the Spanish and the French throne, caused a lot of problems for some entities. For example, England was very upset by it. the Austro-Hungarian Empire was very upset by. But about the time of the founding of New Orleans, 1718, all was resolved and Spain was declared a property of the Bourbon family. And the Bourbons brought with them their line of thought, a love of the enlightenment, and a series of reforms that were designed to make Spain more efficient. They were known as the Bourbon reforms. Now, having said that, all of this time period where Louisiana was under French rule, it depended heavily upon the Spanish Caribbean. The reason is quite simple. To get to Santo Domingo, the richest of the French colonies, was a very treacherous voyage because of pirates. To try to get to Canada was also rather treacherous because it was basically for such a big part of the year a mass of ice. So therefore, French Louisiana had to look to the Spanish Caribbean, specifically Havana, Veracruz. And in fact, the first governor of Louisiana, Bienville, actually sent a delegation to Mexico City to thank the viceroy of New Spain or Mexico for the assistance given to the young colony. The young colony received animals, arms, food, boats, you name it, and the Spanish Caribbean was a source for it. Of course, the monarch that we most associate with Spanish Louisiana is Carlos III. And here we have a wonderful painting of Carlos III. It's done by Andres de la Calleja after Mings. Mings was one of the great painters of this period in Europe. He did work throughout Europe, and this is perhaps the most famed painting of Carlos III. Well, if you ever have been to a post office in the United States, you will notice how there's always a photograph of a president, of the current president. Well, this was the painting selected to go into all the royal buildings. This particular painting is of particular importance because the painter, de la Calleja, was one of the founding members of the Royal Academy of San Fernando of Fine Arts. And it's always been at the Academy, and it greets one just as one enters immediately. And you can see just the beauty of it. They selected top painters who could excel in copying this magnificent painting. Now, the Hispanic world. This is a rather large map, about 3 feet by 4 feet. It has an accompanying map that is far more precise, but they accompany a 30-page dissertation that was printed in Manila in 1761. But as wonderful is it, this dissertation was written by a young Jesuit who wanted to remind Carlos III that the Philippines were the stepping stone to the Far East for the spiritual conquest of Asia. So he wrote this and sent to Carlos III his thesis, but in it he proposed a new system of cartography, which would have made Spain look more important. Plus, he proposed a faster route to the Philippines. Now, if you look at this map, you'll see how Spain is represented as a queen. You'll note that the English colonies are sort of left off the map, but also, let's start at the top, at the crown. It represents the 5 Spanish kingdoms of Granada, Navarre, Castile, and the 2 other provinces. Then you look down, and there is the collar, which represents various trade routes, her necklace, in other words. Then you look down, and her shawl is basically North and South America. And if you were to lay this map on its side, all would appear normal, with North America being above South America. But here they are, they're done as her shawl. Then you look, in one hand, she's holding a standard, and the standard that she's holding represents the equator. Okay, at the top, of course, is a cross. You'll notice above her head is a dove. The kings of Spain, of course, were the most Catholic monarchs, and that is meant to be representative of that. Then you look at her dress. There's different pleats or folds in her dress. Those represent the existing trade routes from the Philippines to cities such as Acapulco, all along the western coast of North and South America. Then, if you look at her feet, they are standing upon 2 of the islands of the Philippines. The little thesis or dissertation that accompanies this is only about 30 pages long. There's only 1 copy known to exist, and that is at the Huntington Library. Here we have Havana, representing Louisiana's long ties to Havana. Havana in the 18th century, you have to remember, was a very large city. One of the principal industries was naval construction. In the entire New World, there were only two cities larger than Havana, which were Mexico City and Lima. It was also substantially larger than, say, Boston and New York. Here, again, we have this ongoing relation between the Spanish monarchs and the French monarchs. This is known as the Flower of France. It originally was in the Natural History Museum of Carlos III, which today is known as the Prado. It was in a beautiful room that overlooked the Royal Botanical Gardens, and now it is in the National Archaeological Museum. Unfortunately, we know very little about the person who created this. It's considered to be one of the masterworks of French decorative arts. All of the French cousins of Louis XV and Carlos III are represented, with Louis XV being at the top in a miniature painting that was copied off of the famed Van Loo portrait of Louis XV. Now, here we are again from the Spanish National Library. We have one of the family pacts between Spain and France. And it's an indication where we can see how close these two thrones were. And you'll note on about the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth line, it refers to the Spanish king as his Catholic Majesty and to the French king as his Christian Majesty. And that is how they were basically referred to. And also the King of Spain during this period was never referred to as the King of Spain. He was referred to as the King of Las Españas, plural. And so here we have one of the great letters for Spanish Louisiana history. And it begins, "Sir, my brother and my cousin." This is Louis XV writing to Carlos III, offering him Louisiana. It's very interesting because Louisiana originally belonged to Spain, but Spain found no wealth in Louisiana immediately. But as time went on, the French began to have an interest in it, and then later the British and the United States. And it turns out that the gold was passing right before them. They were, of course, looking for gold and silver in the 16th century. But in the case of Louisiana, the gold was the Mississippi River. We're very fortunate in this exhibit to have both this letter and the copy of the letter of Carlos III, which is, of course, in the French National Archives. So we actually are fortunate to have the original French letter and the copy that was retained by the household of Carlos III. Here we have the royal standard of Carlos III. It's a replica, but what is fascinating about it is there are several people to this day in Madrid that still make 18th century flags and earlier flags using the same techniques that they used in the 18th century. They're basically painted on silk with gold thread. And we had three such flags commissioned for this exhibition. Another item that we had commissioned for this exhibition is this model of a Spanish galleon that traveled between Spain and the New World. And what's fascinating about it is the person that did it, it took him a rather long amount of time to do it. It took him almost 1 year to make the model. Now, today we think about traveling on a Boeing 747 or so. Well, keep in mind the boat wasn't much bigger. The voyage took 60 days and you had a space of about 16 square feet to live in during the course of the voyage. And you kept your most precious cargo with you, which would include, say, the pigs that you brought to feast upon in the course of the 60-day voyage. You have to be very careful with Spanish in this period because they talk about the jardines or the gardens that were on these ships. Well, they were really not gardens. You know, you think of these monstrous Chinese ships that had gardens. Really, the jardin was a sort of portalet that hung off the side of the ship that served as the restroom. Keep in mind, there was limited air circulation throughout the lower quarters during the 60-day voyage. Now we come to Antonio de Ulloa. Antonio de Ulloa was the first Spanish governor of Louisiana. He's most frequently remembered by not being the biggest hit with the French, and because he was sort of, for lack of a better term, chased out of town. However, we are so fortunate that his library survives intact at the University of Seville. And here is Sir Isaac Newton's work on universal mathematics. Moving on, we'll see a series of books written by Antonio de Ulloa. He had accompanied French expeditions to South America. He had served as a governor. But this book is of particular interest because it has his own book plate in it on the left side. And on the right side is the last book plate of a member of his family to own the book before it was acquired by the collection. So we're very pleased to be able to show that, along with this book, Noticias Americas, News of the Americas. This was actually a presentation copy prepared for Carlos III. In it, he has extensive sections on his observations about Louisiana. For example, we learned that the Mississippi River, though it appeared dirty, was really very clean, but the fish tasted awful. We learned that the equator was not the hottest place on Earth based on his comparison of temperature. We learned that the Native Americans of Louisiana did very intricate body paintings that he considered to be among the most beautiful that he has seen anywhere. And here we have a treaty. Now, it was initially misidentified as being an oath of allegiance by the Quapaw Indians and the representative of the King of Spain. Well, fortunately, there are people that are frequently far more knowledgeable than archivists and wiser. And Judge Morris Arnold, who is an authority on colonial Arkansas, read this very carefully, and the wording matched perfectly with the other treaties of this period between Indian nations and the Spanish monarchs. What is amazing is he contacted a genealogist of the Quapaw family who was able to identify the Indian chief who was involved in this treaty and track down every member of that family to the present day. Now, when this treaty was signed, the Indian chief was given a gold medal with an image of Carlos III on it. The current members of that family, who are still very much in existence today, have only not the gold medal presented to them of Carlos III, but that of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. New Orleans was a very colorful city, and this is one of the samples of many of the uniforms that we have on display in the exhibition. The Archive of the Indies not only has the drawings of the uniforms, but in many cases, they still have the fabric samples. I got ahead of myself. The ways that Spain influenced Louisiana are multiple. Everyone thinks, of course, of Louisiana law and French law. The fact of the matter is, after the Spanish left, the local population asked that they be allowed to continue under Spanish law. However, Claiborne said no, but they could continue under French law. So they simply wrote the Spanish laws so that they would look like French laws. And here is a publication done in 1820 of the laws of Spain that go back many centuries before Louisiana was even thought of. And it was considered necessary for those laws to be translated into English so that lawyers could practice. And you'll note it clearly says, which are still in force in the state of Louisiana. And here we have the first entry of the Acts de Cabildo. Basically, the current city council of New Orleans can be traced back to this fundamental document. Here, of course, the Spanish and French rules concerning slavery were quite different. Here's a receipt for a payment of a young American Indian girl. However, and it was done shortly before O'Reilly arrived. And here we have O'Reilly's proclamation outlawing slavery of Indians. This was nothing new. Columbus had proposed it and brought back with him 500 Indian slaves, and immediately Ferdinand and Isabella said, no, return them to where you got them. They cannot be enslaved. And then finally, we have this document, which you'll see, it's the chief of the nation Chitimachas selling property to another individual. So it shows you just how different the Indian concept of Indian slavery was from Spain to other nations in North America. Now, slavery of African Americans was also very different. Under French rule, a slave could only be free if the Superior Council gave permission to the owner to free the slave. But in Louisiana, in the Spanish world, an African American could buy their freedom. In fact, sometimes in some provinces, as soon as they put the initial payment down, they were free immediately. It varied, the process varied from province to province. If a slave cohabitated with a Spaniard, they could request their freedom. And we have a sample of both of those cases in the exhibit. And finally, if a slave was mistreated, they could sue their owner, which was quite different. And here we have the official order of Carlos III as proclaimed by El Conde de Galvez, also known as Bernardo de Galvez, saying that it was no longer possible or permitted for slaves to be marked or branded. And here in this document, you'll note there is a little design at the top, and that was the copy of the royal seal or brand used to brand enslaved persons. This was done in 1773, but the 1786 document totally outlawed the use of brands. And we are very fortunate that this little reproduction of a brand survives. Now, here's the oath of allegiance of the Free Black Militia to the King of Spain. Basically, Spain felt that free people of color were of economic advantage more so than slavery. One of the things to keep in mind is that the practices concerning Indian slavery and African American slavery were better observed in the major cities than in the distant rural areas. Here we come to our third major government. We've seen the books of Ulloa. We've seen how O'Reilly, known down here as Bloody O'Reilly, instituted different Spanish laws of governance. And here's O'Reilly. We always think of him as a military hero, but he was far more than a military hero. He was a playwright. He was a person who did hot air balloons experiments and published them in English in journals in London. He was also a man of enlightenment. And when he arrived in Mexico, he learned that Mexico City was in the midst of a crisis with tremendous sickness and hunger. So rather than take the designated route that was passing through all the triumphal arches, he went very hurriedly to Mexico City. His family was most important. His uncle was Jose de Galvez, minister of the Indies. His father had preceded him as Viceroy of Mexico. And basically, there were Galvez family members in positions of power, all the way from Rio de la Plata to present-day Russia. They made their fortune several ways. One is they had the monopoly on playing cards in the New World. But secondly, they moved to the Canary Islands, which was the last place for the ships to restock before making the Atlantic voyage. But, you know, Galvez was a little bit radical. He gave a lot of his money to wipe out the disease, to feed the people. And then he asked other members of the nobility in Mexico to match the money that he had put up, which was quite shocking and radical. He also, for his triumphal entry into the bull ring of Mexico City, elected not to enter in the vice-regal carriage, but rather on foot with the Indians. That was quite amazing for its day. Now, Galvez had a particular interest in music. He brought the first known composer to Louisiana to compose music primarily in the Spanish style. But he also wrote a very important treatise on theatrical, or how can I say it, for lack of a better term, theatrical do's and don'ts. You know, what could be done in a theater, what could be done in a church. He permitted the use of church musicians and theaters, and he also set what is now the common time for most musical performances. They would always be in the early afternoon, and he decided they could be later in the day, the early evening. Well, today, the manuscript for this treatise exists in the National Archives of Mexico. There's one copy in a library, the Bancroft Library, and there are a team of researchers at UCLA preparing an annotated edition of that treatise, which is going to give us great insight into his full knowledge of the performing arts and his impact. Now, you know, New Orleans is known for fires, and I'm going to give your ears a chance to pause from my voice, and we're going to watch.
Throughout history, great cities have been destroyed by great fires. London, New York, Chicago. Great fires that brought about great changes. Spanish colonial New Orleans also experienced great fires, two, in fact, in 1788 and 1794. Out of those disasters, the city was reborn, a New Orleans that was safer, more urban, and more prepared for the expansion and growth that followed. The first fire began in the afternoon of March 21st, 1788. Fed by strong winds, the flames eventually destroyed 856 of the over 1,100 buildings in the city. In that fire, most of the buildings lost were made of wood, but those included some of the city's most prominent structures: the church and presbytery, along with numerous church records, the municipal building, the barracks, the armory with all its arms, most of the businesses, including all of the bakeries, and many of the principal mansions of the city. The Spanish administration sprang into action, arranging for temporary housing in tents and providing rations for those who had lost everything. The city survived and began to rebuild, but just 6 years later, the second fire destroyed over 200 buildings. This second, smaller fire of December 8th, 1794, began in nearly the same area and destroyed much of what had just been rebuilt. After the fires, the government sought to prevent a third great fire. They created fire patrols, employing both white and free black militia members. They developed new building codes that required slate or tile roofs and walls of stronger bricks covered with stucco. And with the new buildings set flush to the sidewalks, there were no more gardens and yards surrounding them to catch fire. Interior courtyards were accessed through narrow alleyways or carriageways, and balconies patrols, employing both white and free black militia members. They developed new building codes that required slate or tile roofs and walls of stronger bricks covered with stucco. And with the new buildings set flush to the sidewalks, there were no more gardens and yards surrounding them to catch fire. Interior courtyards were accessed through narrow alleyways or carriageways, and balconies held iron railings. New Orleans not only proved safer thanks to these building codes, but it also took on a new look, as houses were rebuilt in different styles than before. What had been an almost pastoral, French-looking town began to resemble cities throughout the Spanish-American Empire, like Havana, San Juan, and Cartagena. Although destructive, the fires paved the way for the city's growth over the next decade. The economy and population of New Orleans increased, leading to a denser city center with more and taller buildings and expansion beyond the confines of the old quarter. If you'd like to learn more about this and other topics related to our exhibition Spanish New Orleans and the Caribbean, join us at the historic New Orleans Collection at 520 Royal Street in the French Quarter. Visit our website for more details.
I would simply like to add two things to that video. First of all, there actually was a fire department in New Orleans during the Spanish period. They were buying fire trucks of some sort, we have no image, from Philadelphia. And second, you'll notice the subtitle. The exhibition is entirely bilingual. Now, one of the things that was very important about the fires, as mentioned, is it gave rise to many new buildings and expansion of the city. While people always focus on the existing plans from Spain, a good number survived in North America of buildings from the Spanish period. In fact, when the total number is counted, it's probably going to be closer to 300 such buildings. Here, this is one of the more important documents. It's the Treaty of Friendship, Boundaries, and Navigation that gave the Americans the right of portage in New Orleans. It was signed by Thomas Pinckney. So in the United States, it is referred to as Pinckney's Treaty. But in Spain, it's referred to as Godoy's Treaty. Now, the Spaniards built many of the forts along the Mississippi River. While the French laid them out, the Spanish basically brought them to completion. And this is a story that can be told over and over again. But the Spanish realized one thing, that the forts were far apart. So therefore, they needed to be able to patrol the areas between the forts. So they actually established what became known as the Spanish Mississippi Naval Squadron. This was occurring about the same time as Spain was establishing their Coast Guard. The Spanish brought so much to New Orleans. And you have to keep in mind that Spain itself did not have a large population at this time. And here is a survey of land from St. Bernard, Louisiana, where the people from the Canary Islands went to live. The people of the Canary Islands have played a tremendous role in several cities in North America and throughout the Americas, and in fact were the founders of the city of San Antonio. Now, everything in the colony was governed by a special set of laws, the Recopilation de las Indies. And when Carlos III died, everything had to be done according to a prescribed manner. The same thing for the proclamation of Carlos IV. The importance is that they named so many, they referred to so many artists and how much they paid them to create the large ceremonial tomb of Carlos III, to do the paintings of Carlos IV and his queen. This begins as early as 1770. Financially, you can reconstruct everything, but, excuse me, they do not give the names of the artists. Now, one thing is, I mentioned that everything was done according to a prescribed formula. And unfortunately, there's no painting showing the ceremony for the proclamation of Carlos IV as King of New Orleans. But there is one from a small town in Mexico. And if you look at the laws of the Indies and compare the laws of the Indies to this painting, to what was done in New Orleans, everything aligns perfectly. Now, here we come to the papal bull establishing the province, or the diocese rather, of Louisiana and the Floridas. It was an immense territory. The king, of course, was very involved in the nomination of the first bishop, Pino y Cardenas. And you'll notice that the handwriting is almost impossible to read. It's written in a very specific type of handwriting reserved for papal bulls of the period. But again, New Orleans was a city of great color. Here is the front cover that hung from the altar of the St. Louis Cathedral during the Spanish period. The Ursuline nuns made several exquisite sets of vestments, one of which is in the exhibit, that survived to this day. And it shows you that New Orleans was probably not as much of a backwater as people have made it out to be. You look in the inventories and people were buying very luxurious fabrics for their clothes. Moving on, it was a period of scientific exploration, and the Archbishop of Mexico was quite a collector. He had a particular interest in incunabile, books, portraits, and a cabinet of curiosities. And so he dispatched someone to Louisiana, and they brought him back 3 tusks of mastodons, 5 to 21 million years old, that survived to this day in his collection. And what's interesting is the little identification tag that you see underneath the tusk is the original identification tag. The collection has been kept intact. It is in the hands of a public school in Toledo, Spain. They maintain everything. They have their own curator, and they even continue to add to the cabinet of curiosities. For example, they have the first microscope used in Spain, or the first movie projector used in Spain. So the tradition of this archbishop has been kept alive. And I skipped one. Here is the plan of what New Orleans looked like when the Spaniards arrived. And then, by comparison, you'll see after the two major fires, the city has been expanded. The Faubourg Saint-Marie to the Marigny, both have a town square, just like the French Quarter does. There's very many topics that could be talked about. The impact of Spain on medicine was tremendous. They had a royal hospital, but they also had a hospital for lepers. They also had a hospital for contagious diseases, and they also inoculated the populace. The impact that we hope to convey through this exhibition is a reevaluation of Spanish Louisiana. For so long, our country's history has been written focused on New England, when people fail to remember that a good deal of Spanish currency flowed through New Orleans to support George Washington and his troops. We wanted to educate the large Hispanic population in New Orleans about their heritage, but also to educate the rest of the citizens of New Orleans about the Hispanic heritage. The exhibit will be up through January 22nd. And one may ask, why did you go to so much trouble and expense to only have an exhibit to be up for 3 months? But unless there is a very special exception, objects in Europe are not allowed to travel for exhibition purposes more than 3 months at a time. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Sorry that I displayed my lack of technological expertise, but hopefully it was at least entertaining. And please come visit us. And I believe if you elect to get a copy of the bilingual exhibition catalog, that you do get a special discount. There will be several handouts going up on the screen, including all of the an inventory of all of the lending institutions with their history, and a checklist of the items that we had a chance to look at tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. It's just incredible. We appreciate it. Yeah, I thought you did a really good job on the tech. Don't be
I'm
crazy about
only
the technology.
5 minutes over,
That's all right. We're going to open
which
it up
is
to
a record for me. I am always over.
you did just fine, and we're so happy you were there. So if you have questions, you can, I think the best thing to do is just type them right into the, where did this go? Type them right into the chat box there too. I'm going to take over here again. I'm going to reclaim my host position, and I am now the host, and I think I'm going to see if I can share my screen now. I should be able to do that. I'm going to share that screen right now, and people should be able to see that. So I'm going to put that up. Just give you a couple quick things as we go through this. Oh, I went to the beginning. Let's go to the end. Here we are. A couple things to wrap up with, and then we'll open to questions. You can watch this webinar anytime. Give me a week or so to get it up on the Manuscript Society website. I'll give you that link in just a bit. You'll be able to see the entire thing from beginning to end, including the interesting video. The handouts will also be there, and you can download them as a handout. I want to thank the trustees and staff of the Manuscript Society, and for you for being part of the program, and especially Dr. Lemmon. We're so appreciative of all you do and all you've continued to do in this really great presentation. More programs are on the way. If you have a topic that you'd like to hear and see, or you want to present a program, let me know, and I'll give you my information. You can get a hold of me there. If you want to underwrite these programs, you want to sponsor some of the programs, great educational program, a great opportunity to show your support for these programs, Manuscript Mondays and the Manuscript Society. See me about that. What's next? In January, we're going to have our New Year's holiday leftovers party. It's going to be kind of an open house. It's not going to be a webinar. It's going to be a meeting, so everybody can chat with everybody else. We can share some new ideas. We're going to get members of the board, our trustees, to talk about what's coming up. In February, our special guest is Melanie Smith. She is a professional appraiser and owner of Seaside Art Gallery down in Nags Head, North Carolina. She's going to give us an insider's perspective on collecting cartoon art. On March 6th, I'm going to do a program called Oscars, Emmys, and Grammys, Oh My, and Nobel Prize medals too. We're going to talk about three-dimensional collectibles and objects that denote some major levels of achievement, whether they be in music or entertainment or in science as well. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. If you're not a Manuscript Society member, you can go to manuscript.org. That's where you get some more information on it, and you can sign up. That's also the place you go to see the webinar, the recording of the webinar, and all the other ones we've done in the past. There's about a dozen of them up there so far. You can enjoy those. No, you don't have to be a member, but you should be. And if you need more information, you can reach me at brian@cathonis.com. So with that, I'm going to see if we have anybody that has any questions. I'm going to the Q&A, and Craig Sperling, by the way, says, excellent presentation, very informative, easy to follow, and I look forward to more. Thank you, Craig. Here's a question from Roger for you, Alfred. Question for speaker. How did New Orleans fare during the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763? The French lost the war, says Roger.
Well, this is what is interesting. What people, there's a, Louisianians love their history. However, there's so much that we don't know about. And in regards to the French and Indian War, there's one story I love to tell. So get ready. I'm going to get animated. One of the things that most people do not realize is that France knew very well they were going to lose the war, that Great Britain was going to come out ahead. So they drew up a proposal for people living in present-day Canada, or then New France, to be moved to the Mississippi Valley. They were going to be given incredible resources to help them restart their life. And all of the cities were going to retain their original name, except they were going to add the word new in front. So there would have been a new Quebec, a new Montreal. And this is one of the fields that it's only been explored in one article. And I will put in a plug for the collection. We have the proposal within our holdings, and I personally consider it a gem because basically it shows just how much we do not know. What happened was, before they could act upon this proposal, the war proceeded faster than they thought. The Acadians went into exile, many to Belle-Île in France, who were subsequently brought by the Spaniards to Louisiana. And even when you deal with the Louisiana Purchase, it's very interesting that as shortly as 6 months before the United States purchased Louisiana, Napoleon was trying to acquire Florida. By that, I mean both East and West Florida. And that, again, is something that we hear very little about. And so it's almost like an invitation. People might think that Louisiana history has been thoroughly studied, but it is not. There are so many documents and archives in places where people would never imagine that remain to be explored. And come on down.
There you go. Well, here's another one for you. Actually, we don't have the name of this attendee. Did the French and Spanish share the French guardhouse that was destroyed during the Good Friday fire of March 21st, 1788? She said, I know the Spanish rebuilt it, but don't know much about the collaboration, if there was any.
Well, one thing that I can say is that during the early days of Spanish rule, there was more cooperation than people thought. First of all, initially, the Spanish in New Orleans had a uniform that was somewhat different, that looked more French than Spanish. Secondly, and this may surprise some people, Alejandro O'Reilly, who instituted the city council, who banned slavery of Indians, who instituted reforms concerning African-American slavery, who did so much. People don't realize that he was in New Orleans for only 6 months. But something else, Alejandro O'Reilly, had been used in Havana to sort of reinstitute Spanish rule after the English were thrown out. And Carlos III knew his people fairly well. And he knew that Alejandro O'Reilly was definitely a force to contend with. So prior to sending Alejandro O'Reilly to replace Ulloa, he wrote Louis XV, his dear cousin, and asked him if he thought that would be okay. Louis XV said, fine. So there was a high level of cooperation on many different levels in New Orleans. And in fact, 4 of our Spanish governors were actually given permission to marry French girls, which was a little bit unusual because they normally did not intermarry with the locals.
Yeah.
I can answer
Great.
that there was a high degree of cooperation. We wish we had more drawings of buildings. We're pleased that we're coming out with about 300, but you have to consider several things for this region. Paper was very scarce. And even at the end of the Spanish period, when they went to draw, not the Cabildo, but the government house, there's a wonderful long paragraph saying that they were unable to draw the entire government house because they didn't have a piece of paper that was big enough. And
Isn't that wild?
the same thing at the time of the Louisiana Purchase. But I can definitely say there was a higher degree of cooperation than people may think. That's not to say they always didn't see eye to eye.
Understood. Well done. That was great. That's excellent. Annie Pike just says, got to go, but thank you both for an informative webinar. Learned so much and some new history about a region I did not know about. Super in capital letters. So with that, I will say thank you, Alfred. It's been always delightful and a special treat tonight to have you part of Manuscript Monday. Hope you come back and join us again with another exciting topic. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next month right here on Manuscript Monday. Good night, y'all.
Bye-bye.